Right, so this is a presentation from topic 1 of Unit 3. The title of this topic is Theory of Production. And what we're going to focus on in this presentation is business costs. Okay, now what I want to distinguish between first of all are short run and long run costs. Now for a business, in the short run, at least one factor of production, so it could be the cost of the factory, etc., are fixed. We'll explain what the word fixed means in a minute. In the long run, all costs are variable, and again we'll explain what that word variable means in a minute. Okay, so now we've distinguished between different types of costs, short run and long run. Let's look at how a business will work out what we call their total costs, or the TC. Total costs for a business are equal to fixed costs plus variable costs. A fixed cost is a cost that doesn't change with output. So for example, if you work in a shop and you're looking at the rent of the shop, if that shop sells 1,000 products a day or one product a day, the rent stays the same, so it's not dependent on output. A variable cost, though, is dependent on output. That means the more a business sells or produces, the higher will be their variable costs. So for example, if you're a car company, you're making one car a day, you've only got to purchase the raw materials to make one car. If you're making 100 cars, you have to buy the raw materials to make 100 cars, which clearly will be more expensive. Let's take a little numerical example. So what I'm going to do is put together a small table. Q here stands for quantity. So let's assume we've got a business that's producing over 4 different output levels, 1, 2, 3 or 4. What I want to know is what their fixed costs are and what their variable costs are at these different levels of output. From that we'll be able to work out their total costs. Let's just complete the table first of all. Right, so let's imagine our business, let's imagine it's a shop. The only fixed cost the shop has maybe is rent. And let's imagine the rent comes to £100 a day. So because this isn't dependent on output, this means over output levels 1, 2, 3 and 4, the fixed costs always remain at 100. Okay, let's imagine the main variable cost for the business is the cost of the output and maybe some labour costs as well. So let's imagine our shop is making t-shirts. If they sell one t-shirt a day, that t-shirt might cost them, let's say, 20 quid if it's design label top. So let's imagine over output 1, the labour costs and the costs of buying the t-shirts comes to £40. That will mean when we produce 2, the variable costs increase to 80. So 3, 120 and 4 take it up to 160. So when we produce 1, total costs 140. Produce 2, 180, 3, 220, and then 4, 260. Okay, now what we can do now is to introduce some other different types of costs as well. So we've got there the 3 main costs that we look at, but what we also want to think about are marginal costs and what we call average total costs. Let's start with what we mean by marginal cost first of all. A marginal cost is the addition to output of producing one more unit of output. So it's the addition to the original total. So let's take the example when we produce 1. We've got to assume that when we produce 0, we've still got to pay our rent. So if the shop sells no t-shirts, then they still have to pay their rent. So the only addition to total costs of producing 1 extra unit of output will be 40. That is that variable cost. We can see that when we go from 1 to 2, our total costs go up by 40. When we produce 3, our total costs go up by another 40. So we can see that our marginal costs in this case are always 40. It might not be the same for a business overall, but for this little example here, this is the case. Average total cost. This clears the average cost of production. For our business, when we produce 1, total costs are 140. they're producing 1. Average total cost is the output. I beg your pardon, it's the total costs divided by the output. So in this case, 140 divided by 1 gives us 140. Next case, 180 divided by 2. Average costs go down to 90. Next one, 220 divided by 3. If my maths are right, that will come to 73. And then, of course, a few pence as well. Next one, 260 divided by 4. That comes to 65. Okay, now what we can see here then is as output increases, the average cost of producing something has fallen for this business. This is what we call increasing returns to scale. And we'll look at this in a diagram in a minute. You might know these from AS as economies of scale. These are the things that make the average cost start to fall. So in this case, we can see that the rent or the fixed costs is what is leading to more economies of scale. Think about it logically. If we're paying £100 rent just to produce one t-shirt, that's quite inefficient. Efficiency increases when we go to output level 4 because our £100 costs are now being used to sell 4 t-shirts. So there we have our economies of scale. Right, what I want us to do now is to think about how we can graph these different curves. So what I'm going to do first of all is to draw my axes. I'll have output on the horizontal axis and then costs on the vertical axis. Now our average total cost curve will always resemble this shape here. Okay, I'm just going to put a little point on this curve here for obvious rule, for reasons I'll explain in a minute. To the left of this point, we have economies of scale. We can see that as output increases, the average cost of production will start to fall. There are economies of scale starting to kick in for a business. The business is getting more efficient. At this point, we've achieved what we call productive efficiency. We're producing at lowest average cost. It's the most efficient point for a business to be at. To the right of this, we have what we call diseconomies of scale. We can see as output increases, the average costs are starting to increase. That could be because the factory we're using is no longer capable of keeping up with the output that we want to produce. It could be communication problems, coordination problems. All these different things will lead to average costs starting to increase. Let's just look at our basic line, our average total cost point. What we will draw in here is a second line. We've got here our marginal cost curve. Okay, now think about what this point shows us, this productive efficient point. To the left of our productive efficient point, we can see that average total costs are always higher than marginal costs. This means as output increases, the addition to total costs will suck down the average. Beyond the productive efficient point, the marginal cost curve is always above the average total cost curve. This means the addition to total costs is sucking the average up again. So our productive efficient point is what we call our optimum output point. That's the point where we want business to operate at, because that's the efficient point for them to be at. It's the point where they can offer us the lowest prices, so that means our economic welfare should potentially increase. So this is looking at production in the short run. What I want to focus on now is production in the long run. And what we're going to draw here is our envelope curve. So again, if I draw the axes, we've got quantity and we've got costs. What I'm going to draw now is a very small set of curves. This one, short run average total costs. This one, short run marginal costs. So this is looking at our short run costs. So here we can see that for a business, one cost will be fixed. Think about what's happening. We start here, as output grows, economies of scale. After that point, this economies of scale. efficiency starting to fall. Now what could have happened is, beyond the productive efficient point, that point there, this business is maybe starting to become too big for its existing premises. Maybe the factory is too small for the output they want. It's causing lots of problems. What a business will then do, because in the long run, remember, all costs are variable, the business can move onto a new SRATC curve. That's because they've moved to a bigger, better factory. That means they can now start to produce things cheaper again. And again, you've got economies of scale, and you've got diseconomies of scale. Again, when the business gets to the productive efficient point, it's getting too big again for the existing premises, it moves. So what you can see starting to form here, the business is building up its long run average total cost curve. It's our envelope curve. Any business, even in the long run, will start to suffer diseconomies of scale. Maybe when the business grows too big, it's operating in so many countries, so many different language barriers. Even in the long run, we've got diseconomies of scale. This point here, this shows again in the long run the productive efficient point. This also shows, therefore, optimum output. It also shows what we call minimum efficient scale. This measures how much the output has got to be for the business to achieve productive efficiency. To the left of this point, average costs higher than what they are. To the right of this point, average costs are again higher. What we tend to see for a business is an LRATC curve that looks like this. This point here is our minimum efficient scale point. That's the minimum output has got to be for the business to be productive efficient. And what this shows, over a massive range of output, the business is operating efficiently. So minimum efficient scale here, but this entire output range shows productive efficiency. That's because it's unlikely that a business will achieve productive efficiency just at one point.